Right. Hello, everyone. I can see people joining. Let's give it a little bit more time. Hi. Hi, we're getting more and more people joining. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Okay. I can see some familiar names from the last webinar. So welcome back. As usual, I think we'll give it about 2-3 minutes to allow people to join us. And then we'll kick off. For those of you who are already here, have a look if you can see the chat option somewhere in your Zoom window, in your view. You should be able to use it throughout the webinar in case you've got any questions. You can also chat amongst yourselves. We've got quite a nice large community of users, and those people who are here might even be able to answer your questions as well. So yeah, feel free to use chat option. There should also be a Q&A option available if you want to post your questions in there. You can post questions at any time during the webinar. I will be monitoring it and then passing them over to our main speaker, Lukman. So I think it's 3:02 now, so I think we'll start, and then hopefully more people will join as we go along. So yes, welcome to this What's New in Jakarta EE 10 webinar part 2. So this is a part 2 of the series of 3 webinars that we're doing. We did our first one last week on Friday, so hopefully some of you have already seen it. Some of you have watched it live on Friday. Some of you might have watched the recording, which is already available on YouTube, and I will post the link in the chat shortly, so you can catch up in case you haven't seen it. In the first part, we were talking about Jakarta EE 10 microservices, what's new in microservices side of Jakarta EE 10, and today we will be focusing on traditional enterprise development in Jakarta EE 10. So as last week, our speaker is Lukman Said, who is our Jakarta EE specialist and technical writer at Payara. So yes, I think, yeah, more people are joining, so welcome to those of you who's just joined. And as I said before, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat in the Q&A option at any time. And I think I'll pass it over to you, Lukman, now to start. Stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dominica. I'll just go straight to the IDE. Can you see my screen?
Yes, always good. We can see it.
Great. So as we did last week, we just dive in straight. Jakarta EE 10, as you all know, was released in September of 2022, and it was the first feature-packed release of the platform since the move to the Eclipse Foundation. Now, today we're going to look at features that are generally suited to traditional enterprise application development. So without further ado, let's just dive in. One of the key features for persistence is the support, or the standardized support for using the use of UUID as primary keys for entities. In the past, you needed to use the implementation of the custom implementations of the runtime. For instance, Hibernate had support for that, but it wasn't standardized. So generally, it was not portable. But now it's part of the Jakarta specification, the Jakarta Persistence specification. So you can use UUID as the primary key type of your Jakarta Persistence entities. So as an example, we have here a simple bin, a form bin, and then it has the field of type UUID, and then we are setting it as the ID of the entity, and then we are annotating it with @generated with a strategy being generation type.uuid. So now this has gone a step further to become a part of the Jakarta EE specification itself. So you can freely use this without fear of being logged into as an implementation of the Jakarta Persistence runtime. The next one is Typesafe API for creating Jakarta Faces views. Now, one of the major changes in Jakarta EE10 was, or one of the major specifications that underwent a lot of changes was or is the Jakarta Faces. In the past, you might have, we used to call it Jakarta or Java Server Faces, which became Jakarta Server Faces. And then in Jakarta EE10, it finally became Jakarta Faces. So it's now Jakarta Faces or Faces for short. Now, one of the key features of that particular release of the specification in Jakarta EE10 is the ability to create UI components in using Typesafe Java API. So if any of you is familiar with the Vaadin programming paradigm, for instance, it's a similar thing for Jakarta Faces. So rather than write or create your faces in XML, you do everything completely in Java. So as an example, we have this greet being here that extends the facelet class here, and then we are implementing a method here. We need to implement this abstract method, the apply method here. And in here, we are creating the UI programmatically. So in the past, you would do this with XML in the facelet, but now we are using the Java API to actually create the facelet in the code. So this is a type-safe way of creating the UI components for Jakarta Faces. Now, this is a new API that came as part of the release in Jakarta EE10, and so it might not necessarily be feature packed as using the facelet, what we used to have or what we still have, but it's something you want to give it a try because it's an interesting paradigm to be able to write or create the UI components in Java, much similar to how we used to do it in Java Swing, where you just be creating the faces with Java code and all that. Jakarta Faces now has something like that is worth a try. Just give it a try and then see if you like it or not. Of course, it can only get better if you give it a try and then give feedback so that the community will iterate faster with your feedback and all that. So this is something I really encourage you to give a try in your own project. The next one is multi-file upload in Jakarta Faces. Now, in the past, you could upload files just fine in Jakarta Faces, but you couldn't upload multiple files. So if we come here, file upload, here, the file upload component in the input file component here now has a new attribute, which is multiple equals true. Now, when this attribute is set, the rendering is going to allow for uploading multiple files. And then another attribute is the accept. The accept here is used to tell the renderer, to tell the browser the kind of files it should, the type of files it should make available for upload. So when you deploy and then you go to this file upload to upload the files, and then you click the file upload, the upload dialog that comes will only show files of this type here. And then the multiple here true, so you can select more than one file type and then upload it. Now, the caveat you should be aware of is that when you upload your files, even though you set the accept here, this is not necessarily validating. This is just an enhancement to restrict the file types that come in the file upload dialog to the specific file types you mentioned over here. So this is it. You would want to validate the file types in the back end. Of course, you should always validate everything that comes from the front end anyway. But then now you can upload multiple files. Just set the attribute here, the multiple attribute to true. By default, it is false. So the input file component works exactly as it is now. To flip this on, you just set this to true, and then you can upload multiple files, which I think is really cool. And it's a very interesting update that you should also check out in your project. Then the next one is Multipart form data support in Jakarta REST. Of course, in the past, you could always upload files in Jakarta REST, but it was a little bit not so beautiful. But now there is a new API for uploading files using the entity part. So if I come to file upload resource, this guy here, we have this particular endpoint here, and then we have this particular endpoint, and we set this to Multipart, and then you can see the type that is being consumed here is entity part. Now, entity part is part of the release of Jakarta REST in version 3.1, which was the release in Jakarta EE 10. Now, entity part actually comes with a very beautiful API, the much more modern API, the builder pattern type API, where you can create an entity part, and an entity part is essentially part of the specification, the RFC 7578, a multi-part request or response, blah, blah, blah. So you create an entity part, and then you can post to the resource in the back end. And then in your code, you can grab the entity part and then call these methods on it to get the specific part of the entity that you want to use. So in this example, we are getting the file name, and then we are also getting the content, and this is returned to us as an input stream and all that. So the entity part addition to Jakarta REST is a very beautiful developer enhanced API that you really should check out in your project. And then we have enhanced scopes. Enhanced scopes in Jakarta Faces. The client window scope is a new scope. Now, if you are familiar with Jakarta Faces, there are beans or the backing beans. If I say a backing bean, I am referring to the beans or the beans or the Java class instances that are the models for the UI in XML. So this facelet, for instance, has a backing bean. The backing bean of this facelet is the file upload bean type. Now, the client window scope is a new scope added in Jakarta Faces that was part of the release in Jakarta EE 10. This scope now creates a sort of a middle ground where all beans that are in this scope, so if I come here, this client window scope bean, nope. The client window scope bean is essentially a bean that will be in the container or the runtime. Yes, an instance of this particular bean is going to be in existence as long as the user does not open a new URL in the browser window. So you're going to have a single instance, so you can open the same page over and over and over, navigate from one page to the other, and you're going to have the same instance. So it's a sort of a middle ground between application scope or session scope and then request scope. It sort of exists as you can navigate through different pages of the application, and you're going to have the instance still available. The moment you navigate outside of the page, you open a new page in a new tab, then that bean is killed. So the window scope in Jakarta Faces is also a new addition that will enhance your life when you are developing much more traditional applications with Jakarta Faces. Any questions so far, Dominica?
No questions at the moment. So yeah, you can carry on.
Great. Now, Another great feature on the Jakarta EE platform, even though it's really a standalone specification, is the Jakarta MVC. Jakarta MVC is a specification for creating an action-based framework, an action-based web application framework on the Jakarta EE platform. So you want to create web applications, and you are really not a fan of the component-based framework, which is Jakarta Faces, because maybe you are really not used to that kind of paradigm, then Jakarta MVC is your friend. Jakarta MVC is built on the Jakarta REST specifications. So if you are comfortable with Jakarta REST, then naturally you will be very happy with Jakarta MVC. And being an action framework, web framework, it means that you're going to have much more control in terms of how the controller works, unlike in component-based, in a component-based framework where the controller is implicitly controlled by the framework. For the action-based like Jakarta MVC, you are in charge of that. So as an example, if I come to an example like this, the salutation, here. Yes. So if I come to the app controller, this is an example of Jakarta Faces. Jakarta MVC. Sorry, they are competing. So naturally, everybody wants to come out of my mouth. So for Jakarta MVC, this is an example. So you can see it's much similar to Jakarta REST services. Not much similar. This is actually a resource annotated with a path. And then there is a new annotation here, the @controller annotation. The @controller annotation simply means that every method in this particular class here is a controller method. And a controller method is just in Jakarta MVC as an action-oriented framework is a method that takes requests from the client or from the UI and then returns, does some work, blah, 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 and then returns a response to the client. So we have this controller annotation here to tell the MVC runtime that this class here, everything should be a controller. And Jakarta MVC has two ways of creating models. You can use the models map. This is just a giant map with key value pairs where you can put in the keys and then their corresponding values that should be available to the UI. Or you can use the much more traditional @named annotation. So this salutation class here is a normal bean, as a very, very boring, underwhelming, plain old Java object that is annotated with the @request script. And then in here,
Lukman, can you, is it possible to zoom in so that the font is a little bit bigger? That was one of the questions.
Oh, sorry.
I guess it depends on, what kind of monitor people are using.
Presentation.
So apologies for those of you who can't see it very well.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. In the recording, if you want to go back, if you have actually missed anything, there will be a recording available, and it should be hopefully better.
Is this good?
Yeah, thank you, Lukman.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. So this is our salutation bean, and then if we come to where we are using this bean, yes, a controller, yes. So here we simply inject the bean here, and then we are using it to set some values and then return it. Now, this instance is going to naturally or automatically be available in this particular facelet file. Now, Jakarta MVC has two rendering technologies. By default, it uses Jakarta server pages. You also have the option of using Facelet as the rendering engine, and that is what I'm using. So using Facelet as the rendering engine, we just set this, or we populate this as you would do. As a web application, it's always take data or give data to the client. What we are doing here is that we are simply passing data. So the client makes a GET request through accessing this particular facelet in the browser, and then we just populate this instance and pass it to the client. So if we go to the salute.xml here, you can see the salutation.greet and then the salutation.message. These are all the parts that we put in the instance of the bean. So Jakarta MVC is really a framework I would encourage you to take a look at, possibly for your next web application, because it's built on the Jakarta EE specification, and with all the enhancements that came as part of Jakarta EE 10, you have all those available to you in your application that you can employ in the Jakarta MVC usage. Any questions so far, Dominica?
No, you can carry on. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then we have the managed executor service. Now, in enterprise applications, you always have to, or you will have situations where you want to, you have to handle concurrency issues and all of that. In the past, there was really no portable standard way to define execution, managed executor service types and all that. But with the addition of this particular annotation, you can programmatically, through the annotation, define a managed executor service that you can use in your concurrent applications. So if we come to this class, exec service config here, we have the definition, the managed executor definition here, that we are defining some managed executor service types that we want to use in our application. And these are all the values that you can set. There's quite a lot more that you should take a look at in the specification, but you set this and then you can look it up through the JNDI name as you defined in your service. So this is a very interesting way to do away with depending on the implementations, the runtime implementation of defining an executor service. Now you have a much more portable way of defining same. In the absence of any question, we just do a quick run through so far. So
we do actually have a question now.
Okay, please.
Do you want to answer it now or later? It's fine.
Yeah, please. Let's
okay. Okay, so Dan is asking, can Jakarta EE generate tree view visible objects on the screen according to given data like parents, children, grandchildren?
I'm not so sure if I understand what tree view is, but if there is referring to any of the frameworks, whether Jakarta MVC or Jakarta Faces, you can really do that, because these component or these frameworks are detached, sort of. So if it's easy to explain. So let me just do this, file upload. Yeah, here. So for instance, in this facelet file here, everything here is sort of separated from the back end. And it's the same way if I go to my salute, salutation, yeah, in my salute.xml file here, we are passing an object. So if I understand your question correctly, you are referring to the UI where you can generate hierarchical data, sort of the tree with the branches and all of that. Yes, you can do that depending on the data you pass to the back end. You pass from the back end to the front end, and then you can just navigate the data you return from the back end to create the component. So a framework like Prime Faces has different components to render different types of data. And Jakarta Faces, or even Jakarta MVC, which uses Jakarta Faces anyway, doesn't really care about the data. All it wants is that once you give it the data, then you can use the various components to create the tree that you want. So yes, it's very possible to do that, especially in Jakarta Faces, where you have a lot of UI components, frameworks available like Prime Faces. You can quite easily do that. Yes.
Yeah, I think Dan just added maybe some extra explanation, but I think you have answered that. It's something like country, city, area, etc. So I guess going into that.
Yes,
gradual...
absolutely. You can always do that. You can always Yes, you can do that in the Jakarta Faces framework easily. All you have to do is to provide the data. So if I show, let me just post this here. Maybe I can post the URL in the chat for you to take a look at later. So if you go to the prime faces example, you have a tree view. Let me pass it to Dominica to pass it to the chat. You have a tree view where you can actually view hierarchical data. All that matters is what you are returning from the back end. So yes, it's absolutely possible to do that with Jakarta Faces. The truth is that Jakarta Faces has had hasn't really had the kind of exposure that it really deserves. It's a very good framework. It's a very productive framework, but unfortunately in the past, it's had a lot of misconceptions surrounding it. And with the rise of fat client frameworks like Angular, React, and the rest, it really got sort of delegated in terms of marketing and all of that to the backseat. But it's a very capable framework that you really should check out. Very capable, that can do a lot of things. That almost everything you can do in JavaScript, you can actually do in Jakarta Faces. Any kind of data you can actually render straight away with Jakarta Faces. Any other question, Dominica?
No, not at the moment. And yes, I have put the link to the example in the chat for those of you who want to check it out.
Yeah. So Jakarta EE 10, wrapping up, is a release that for me is quite historical because Java EE has gone through a lot of transitions, right? From the J2 EE days all the way to Oracle and the release of Java EE 8 and all of those, all the way to a transfer to the Eclipse Foundation. Jakarta EE 10 marks a revolutionary point in the history of the framework. And Jakarta EE 10 did come with a lot of things. And of course, naturally, some things were also taken out, and we'll be looking at that next week. So it's a very important release that you should check out. And this is just a summary of the key features that came about. We have native support now for UUID, so you don't need to rely on the Jakarta Persistence runtimes. And then we also have Typesafe API. You can just dynamically in Java code generate your UI. And then we have multi-file upload in Jakarta Faces. Just flip the attribute to true, the multiple attribute to true, and then the UI, the component is going to render such that you can pick multiple files. And then we have multi-part form data support in Jakarta REST, principally using the entity part. And then we have the enhanced scope in Jakarta Faces using the @client window scope. Then we have the standalone but very interesting Jakarta MVC specification for creating an action-based or as an action-based component, as an action-based framework, in addition to the component-based Jakarta Faces framework. So you should check that out as well, especially if you are used to action-based frameworks from other platforms and all that. You should really check Jakarta MVC out. And then for execution, for concurrency and all of that, we have a much more portable way of defining the executor servers. Yeah, over to you, Dominica, in the absence of any question.
Great, thank you very much, Lukman. Yes, I can't see any more questions, but we are still here in case anyone would like to ask any questions. So let me quickly jump over to so basically for those of you who may not be familiar with Payara platform, we at Payara have a product that is Jakarta EE compatible, which is why we feel very strongly about Jakarta EE and Jakarta EE 10. We've been very excited to be contributing to that release and for it to be out last year. So make sure that you check out Payara Platform Enterprise. You can go to our website, payara.fish, and request the trial version. You can also download directly the Payara community. You can choose between Payara Platform, Payara Server, which is our full version, or Payara Micro for your microservices deployments. So yeah, everything is on payara.fish website. Yeah, so this was part 2 of our webinar, so the middle one of our webinar series. And next week on Friday, so today is Thursday, so just to make it a little bit more confusing, next one is on Friday, the same time at 3 p.m. We will be carrying on the conversation and about what's new in Jakarta EE10. And this time we'll finish up with what got removed or deprecated. So if you haven't registered to that one yet, I am just now sending the link in the chat again. If you've missed it, sorry, so you can actually go and register to that one if you haven't done so yet. And hopefully the recording of this webinar will also be available. If you've missed anything, or if you know, if you had trouble seeing the maybe the font earlier before we made some changes, it should all be available for you later this week or early next week. So you will all receive some information about that. So yeah, I'm just checking really quickly. No, we haven't got any more questions. So thank you very much, Lukman, for this informative presentation. Thank you everyone for attending. And we do hope to see you next week on Friday at 3 p.m. UK time for part 2. Yeah, thanks very much. See you next week.